Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caring in Crisis, the Tuesday Briefs, a part of the Trauma-Informed Faith Communities Project of Crisis Care Ministries. I'm Reverend Mary Hughes with Crisis Care Ministries, and we are so glad that you've come today. A few reminders before I introduce our speaker. We want to remind you that the webinar is being recorded. At the end of the hour, we'll formally close the webinar and stop the recording, but then if you'd like to and have time, you can stay around for some informal conversation. We'll open up the mics and turn on the cameras and have some informal conversation with our guest today. As you have seen in the introductory slide rotation, you can find all things webinar, details about our schedule and presenters, our resources the presenters have provided at crisiscareministries.net. Click on the webinar hub at the top of the page. And that website is updated frequently, and I've found that sometimes you need to refresh the page. We also want to say a very special word of thanks to our funders and all of those who are providing trainings and resources for the Trauma-Informed Faith Communities Project. We're so very grateful for their support and for their guidance and wisdom. Throughout the webinar today, please feel free to type questions or comments in the chat box, and we hope to address those before the top of the hour. And I'd like to call upon my assistant, Kyla Powers, now to talk to you about attendance certificates.
Hi. So essentially to receive a certificate for the session, you'll need to fill out a request form, which I will send you either today or tomorrow in an email. You'll get that along with an evaluation form. And if you could fill that out for us, that would be a great help to us. And you should receive the certificate within the coming week. And if you have any questions about that, I will put my information in the chat.
Thank you, Kyla. It is my great honor to introduce to you our wonderful presenter today, Veronica Leisure, who's a strong advocate and partner in our very effective Oklahoma Interfaith community. Veronica Leisure received her Bachelor's of Arts in Comparative Literature after graduating magna cum laude from Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas. After earning her Juris Doctorate from the University of Oklahoma College of Law and being admitted to practice in Oklahoma, Veronica joined CARE Oklahoma as staff attorney in 2014, and then expanded her role to Civil Rights Director, culminating in her appointment to Deputy Director in 2022. In her time with the Civil Rights Department, Veronica has served hundreds of clients who experienced religious discrimination and harassment, and educated thousands of Oklahoma Muslims on how to secure their own civil rights, establishing CARE Oklahoma as a leader in the social justice movement in Oklahoma. Very true. Her commentary on religious freedom, civil rights policy, and Oklahoma and community advocacy has been published in dozens of Oklahoma local, state, and national outlets, and she is a frequent speaker in local schools, organizations, state agencies, workshops, and other outlets. Veronica is proud to serve as president of the board of directors for the ACLU in Oklahoma, in addition to serving on the board of the Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation and the Asian Task Force on Domestic and Sexual Violence. She also activated the state's largest legal observer program to protect those exercising their First Amendment rights, which began in 2020 and continues to support local protests and demonstrations. She is honored to serve the Muslim community of Oklahoma and to build bridges of tolerance, justice, and mutual understanding in the state that she calls home. I know you join me in welcoming Veronica Leisure.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that very kind introduction. And thank you all for joining me today. I'm really excited to be sharing this presentation with you because it's a chance for me to share with you the work that my team has done. And that's happened at CARE Oklahoma and in Oklahoma broadly over the past couple of years. So I'm going to go ahead and get my screen share going so that you can see what we have going on for you. And if you should be seeing a screen that says Welcoming the Stranger, Afghan Resettlement in Oklahoma. If you are not seeing that, please indicate such to me so that I can fix whatever's going on my end. But seeing no objections, I will go ahead and just launch right in. So I will be your host for today's presentation. I've served as the Deputy Director at CARE Oklahoma for a couple of years now, and it's really been an honor to walk alongside the Muslim community in this work, both the work of social justice and religious tolerance and freedom in my state, as well as the work that we've recently begun welcoming newcomers to the Oklahoma family. CARE Oklahoma is a chapter of a national network of Muslim civil rights advocacy organizations. We are currently the state's only full-time civil rights advocacy organization geared towards the Muslim community, with full-time department leadership in community outreach, government affairs, and now refugee services. And we've been very proud to be leaders in the interfaith community and in the social justice movements in Oklahoma broadly. You can kind of see some of our work on the screen here that indicates the value that we see in our work and the way that the community has really wrapped its arms around the work of CARE Oklahoma. So to give you some background, in August of 2021, the U.S. military began its withdrawal from Afghanistan after a 20-year presence. The Taliban moved in very quickly, resulting in what's now known as the fall of Kabul, and thousands of Afghans who had worked for the United States military apparatus or for other humanitarian and aid organizations in Afghanistan suddenly found themselves at risk of kidnap, torture, murder, and worse. So 90,000 of Afghans were airlifted out of Kabul in that very short period of time, and 1,800 of them made their way to Oklahoma through Operation Allies Rescue / Operation Allies Welcome. This is the process, but that created temporary humanitarian parole for these Afghans who, again, had served the U.S. military or other aid organizations and allowed them to make their home here in Oklahoma. It was not legal refugee status, although these folks meet the dictionary definition of a refugee, and we'll kind of talk through the implications of that in just a moment. But since the first families arrived in September of 2021, our population is now a little bit over 2,000 in our state, thanks to a multitude of babies being born, as well as other Afghans who've joined us through the traditional resettlement process. So a little bit about Afghanistan is that it's a Muslim majority country. This is a strongly collective culture, which is fairly common in this part of the world, Central Southeast Asia. There's a tremendous amount of ethnic and linguistic diversity within Afghanistan. And so what's true for one family of Afghans may not be true for another family. There are the two primary languages spoken in Afghanistan among this population are Dari, which is kind of best understood as a dialect of Farsi or Persian language, and Pashto. There's also still a very strong honor culture, and they're very heavily patriarchal for very many reasons, with very strongly defined gender roles. There's a tremendous amount too of pride and community, especially for community pride and care. And so these are folks who have been very proud of their culture and their history and their heritage, who have then been placed in a position to accept a massive amount of charity, which does create some trauma and does create some kind of cognitive dissonance for people who are very proud of their ability to survive under very thankless conditions. There's also been very frequent interruptions of various social services in Afghanistan over most of the last 50 years. Things like war and famine, but also just the demands of the weather, of harvest and herding culture, and other things that make it impossible for there to be consistent presence in things like hospitals and schools. Here in Oklahoma, the majority of the refugee resettlement partners who had been used to doing refugee resettlement work were based out of the Christian tradition. And so welcoming a large number of Muslim refugees was a little bit new to many of these folks. Although they approached it with their entire hearts and with the best of intentions, there were a few lessons that needed to be learned about working with a population that does not come from the Christian tradition. And so what we've seen over the past couple of years is this really fascinating blend of Afghan and Oklahoman culture. And we're watching the emergence and the growth of this Afghan Okie community, which is truly, truly rewarding to be a part of this process. So what our Afghan friends had experienced in their resettlement stages, Afghanistan has been at war for most of the last half century. There are adults in our population who never have experienced a country that isn't at war. When they had to flee, they did so under very precipitous circumstances, often with just the clothes that they had on their backs. We met with a father and his two young girls, probably 6 years old and 9 years old, who were in their pajamas and had been in the same pair of pajamas for months because they'd had to flee their home in the middle of the night, were not able to bring with them coats, shoes, ID documents, any other belongings. They were still in those same pair of footy pajamas, the little girls. And so when we say that these people came with very, very little, there just was simply not time for them to gather all of their belongings and their items in order to come here. So once they were displaced, they lived in a very short period of time for military bases overseas, where the first round of security screenings and health screenings and background checks were being done, and the beginnings of paperwork were processed. Then they were moved to military bases in the United States for all of those processes to be completed and for them to be able to board planes to their final destinations. Once they arrived here in Oklahoma, they were placed in short-term lodgings in the form of hotels. There was a local hotel owner who graciously opened up floors of their hotels in various locations so that these folks had a place to stay while their long-term housing was secured. But that meant sometimes months of staying in a hotel room with often very large families. The average family size for this population is 7. So if you can imagine mom and dad and anywhere from 5 to 10 children in a series of hotel rooms with no kitchen, no refrigerator, no ability to cook, and also the kids don't have anything to do because they're not going to school because they're not enrolled yet. That was a very, very challenging circumstance for many of these families. And then once they were able to secure them their long-term housing, because their incomes were often pretty low, there's usually one and maybe a half an earner per household. They were placed in low-income apartments in not very safe conditions. We had a lot of problems with sanitation, with habitability, with air conditioning going out in the summer, and it's 90 degrees in an apartment, and we can't get a landlord to come fix it. And so the housing situation remains very precarious for this vulnerable group of people. And then aside from all of that, is just the psychological and the emotional adjustment of rebuilding your life in a completely foreign culture. Everything from learning the language to navigating transportation to understanding the expectations of the the schoolroom and the workplace. That has definitely been a challenge for these folks. And although they have met it with incredible grace, humility, and courage, that doesn't mean that there's still not ways we can hold their hands and walk alongside them as they're going through this journey. The ongoing struggles are myriad. First of all, we are very concerned about their immigration status. Because these folks came in as what is called under humanitarian parole, they do not have legal refugee status. And so they don't have the benefits or the clear pathway to citizenship and permanent residency that a legal refugee might have. So they have to adjust their status using the mechanisms of asylum, special immigrant visa, or limited other means, all of which are expensive, time consuming, and heavily backlogged. Their healthcare situation is still very challenging because many of the adults and even the children had gone for their entire lives without quality medical care. And so resolving some of these long-term health issues requires follow-up appointments and meetings with specialists, and services that are limited by language and all kinds of accessibility barriers. The growth of the population through new babies being born also presents its own challenges. The cost for things like diapers and formula and baby care items have skyrocketed, with incomes not really rising at the same rate as these needs. So we know that their housing assistance, the limited housing assistance that was available to these folks when they arrived, has all completely run out. And finding landlords or property owners that would rent to families that had no credit history, no work history, no rental history, very limited income, and language barriers, that was really challenging. Although we've had some great experiences with local landlords and property owners, a lot of the larger complexes that have ownership or managers that are based out of state are not truly invested in the growth of the local Oklahoma community. And so finding them this long-term housing was a challenge. With the housing assistance dollars running out and incomes not really growing, we are unfortunately probably going to be looking at some of these families becoming unhoused by the end of the year if something isn't done at the state level. And then the social integration piece is where I think our work really has really taken off. We're seeing a lot of folks, although they're beginning to flourish as the best they can, they're getting jobs, their kids are in school, they're making friends, they're enjoying their new neighborhoods, they're rebuilding lives. and becoming entrepreneurs and building a new Afghan Oklahoma community. But we're still hearing a lot of reports of isolation, of depression, of trauma symptoms, and just of the struggle of being a new person in a new place, and trying to make that new place your own. And so that's where I think our community has really rallied, is in this social integration of making this new community feel truly, truly welcome in Oklahoma. So I'm going to start with phase one of the Care Oklahoma Refugee Services experience. And I'll tell you about some of the work that our partners did, because we worked with a number of other organizations, volunteers, religious groups, and other people who are part of this process. But I'm going to focus on kind of what we experienced at Care Oklahoma, because we are completely new to refugee services work in the summer of 2021. We had not ever been involved in refugee services work and refugee resettlement. And so we were on a learning journey just as much as these families were in many ways. And so I want to share with you kind of how we got started and where we are now. So phase one being the arrival and the initial response to over 1,000 Afghans coming to Oklahoma City in a 4-month period of time. We were very pleased to be able to welcome each Afghan family who arrived to Oklahoma City with a welcome kit and a welcome meal. While the primary resettlement agency in our area, that was Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, or I'll just refer to them as Catholic Charities, while they were responsible for meeting families at the airport and coordinating the actual people who would pick the families up and drive them to their new location, we coordinated these welcome baskets. And they were just laundry baskets that had blankets and little stuffed animals for the kids, little toys, hygiene items like shampoo and soap, because I don't know if you have to use hotel shampoo and soap very often, but it is not always the most pleasant experience, especially if you're having to share it with 6 or 7 or 8 other people. So things like shampoo and deodorant and toothpaste, and toothbrushes, just those little hygiene items that make your life a lot more easy. We also included cultural items like a lota, which is it's basically a handheld bidet that's very commonly used in that part of the world, as well as copies of the Quran and prayer rugs. It was very important to us that this group of refugees, who were predominantly Muslim, knew that as soon as they arrived in Oklahoma, that their faith would be welcome and they would be safe to be practicing Muslims here in the community that they were going to be making their home. And so it was really important that they be met first with that reminder that, like, this is a place of religious freedom and tolerance. And then in addition, we had a local Muslim-owned restaurant who would cook and arrange for a hot, fresh, culturally appropriate halal meal, because Muslims don't eat pork, and many of them will prepare to eat meat that has been slaughtered according to Islamic standards called zabiha. This restaurant could provide that. And so some of these families had been traveling for long periods of time with many kids, without cash, without the ability to pay for anything in the airport, and without the ability to speak clear English so that they knew what was going on around them. And so we could only imagine that a fresh meal meeting you once you're at the end of that journey would be very welcome. We had a meticulously coordinated volunteer driving team who would come to our office, pick up these baskets, and take them to the hotels where the families had been placed. And we had a second set of volunteer drivers who would pick up the fresh meals at the restaurant and drive them down to the hotel once the family had arrived. And so we were able to put together these volunteer teams, and whenever we knew that a new family was coming in, we would be alerted by the resettlement agency, by Catholic Charities, and we would arrange for the meals and the welcome kit to be sent down to them. We packed every single welcome kit. My teammates, our hands and our love and care went into every single welcome kit that these folks received. And it was very, very important that they knew that they would be welcomed with these tokens of our gratefulness that we were able to serve them and our welcome to the Oklahoma City family. We had a local hotel owner reach out and offer the hotel space as short-term lodgings while apartments and rental homes were being found. While these families were there, Catholic Charities was able to cater in halal meals twice a day so that everyone would be assured of food in their stomachs at least 2 times a day. But everybody knows that kids and also adults are going to get hungry in between meal times. So we worked with the local food pantry to create snack boxes that were full of halal and also culturally familiar items, things like nuts or dates, or fruits, dried fruits that would be a little bit more familiar to some of these kiddos so that nobody was stuck being hungry until the next meal. Once we got people into their long-term lodgings, we were able to then coordinate further with the food bank for these food boxes, supplemental food boxes, to be delivered to families on a regular basis, knowing that the price of groceries was so high, that transportation was a barrier, and that an American grocery store might be a little bit overwhelming to newcomers. We were able to bring boxes to them that would have things like produce as well as dry goods like rice or lentils or beans, so that they could begin cooking for themselves in their new homes. Although we've concluded that food delivery process, the food pantries that we worked with have opened their doors to these families and their sponsors and volunteers, and so they're still able to access supplemental food even though it's not being delivered to their doorstep in the same way. So while the families were in the hotels and as they were getting moved into their long-term lodgings, there were volunteers coming in and out constantly. People just dropping in to say, "Hey, how are you doing? My name is Mary. My name is Veronica. My name is Natasha. What can I do for you? How are you feeling?" And so even families who were not able to communicate clearly could still understand that people were coming in to meet with them, to smile, and to provide them with items that would make their lives more comfortable. You would often see the kids out in the parking lot of the hotel playing soccer with a soccer goal that one of the hotel employees actually donated himself because he wanted to see the kids able to have fun. They were coloring and coloring books with supplies that had, again, been donated and brought in by local volunteers who wanted the kids to have something to do. Another incredible partner of ours, the Spiro Project, set up a temporary school in an unused building near these hotels and began busing the kids into these classes so that they could start getting some introductory English classes, introductory schoolwork, so that when they were able to enter the public school system, they wouldn't be too far behind. The adults were able to get cultural orientation trainings through Catholic Charities while they were at the hotels. We were so pleased to be able to meet some of the immediate needs for these families that included clothing and hygiene items. So this is a photo that was taken in one of the spaces that served as our kind of clothing distribution center. We received an overwhelming amount of clothing donations when we started opening our doors and sharing the needs that our new Afghan families were having. There was a period of time where our office was piled floor to ceiling with bags and boxes and stacks of clothing that people had donated because they said, "We don't want these families to go without safe and warm clothing for the season." And so volunteers would come in on a regular basis then and help us sort through and process the donations, put them in areas for women, for men, for girls, for boys, sort them according to sizes so that families could then be brought into this little space and pick clothes for themselves. We felt that that was a very empowering thing for them to be able to do, was to go in and choose clothing items for themselves rather than have it be handed to them and they just had to accept it. And so those experiences of our volunteers getting to know the families were the beginning of some really wonderful friendships that continue on to this day. Phase two was really helping the community to settle in and to grow, not necessarily grow in numbers, but growing in their comfort as members of the Oklahoma family. So the picture that you can kind of see in the background here is actually a series of prayer rugs that were donated to a local school system when they found out that Afghan kids did not have a clean space to pray. And it was actually that the school reached out and said, "These kids have asked if they can do their daily prayers during the school day, and we want them to do it, but we don't have enough prayer rugs. Can you help us?" And the community absolutely rallied and said, "Yes, absolutely," and donated these series of prayer rugs so that every child could have a clean space in which to do their daily prayers. So as families were transitioning into their long-term lodgings, they became a lot more independent. We got the kiddos in school. We got the adults, especially the men who were able to work, got them some full-time employment. So the process of rebuilding life was beginning, but there were still many significant needs that families needed to be met. So I'm really pleased to share the story of our Refugee Resource Center. It opened in April of 2022, but thanks to a partnership between CARE Oklahoma, St. John's Episcopal Church, and the Association of Physicians of Pakistani Descent of North America, or APNA. Say that 5 times fast. It was open 2 days a week, and we operated out of an unused school building that was not being active at that time. And we were able to provide free clothing, free hygiene items, small housewares, baby related goods, and other things that families might need. And one of the things that was really special about our Refugee Resource Center is that the Muslim community in particular began donating Desi clothes. So Desi is a Southeast Asian word that simply means the people, and it's often used to refer to people of Pakistani, Afghanistan, Indian descent. And so that cultural clothing often includes things like a salwar kameez, which is the trousers, the long tunic, and the scarf that many of the women and also some of the men wear, or the long robes that are very common in that part of that world as well. And so these are culturally familiar clothing to our Afghan friends that they weren't able to obtain in other places. And so we were really pleased to be able to open up a specific room and specific racks of clothing that were Desi clothing that these families would find familiar. And that was an incredibly popular thing that we had to offer. Over the year that it was open, the Refugee Resource Center became this hub for the community to come in and not only get their physical needs met in the form of clothing and hygiene items, we also provided free menstrual products to those who needed it. But we also had them come in even when they didn't necessarily need anything, just to meet with other people and to connect with their own community and with the volunteers who were there on a regular basis. And so it really became this hub for the community to come in and see what was going on and share news about their families, and kind of figure out what's next for us and for the people who are walking with us. Here's some photos that you can kind of see of the kids' room where we had everything from baby clothing on up through toddlers, as well as a few toys and books. This is what it looks like when the donations needed to be unpacked. We received boxes and bags and just stacks and stacks of clothing that our very careful volunteers would go through and decide, is this suitable for donation? Is this something that needs to go elsewhere? Every item of clothing that was donated to us made it to a needy person. We did receive some donations that were not as suitable for the Afghan community. Things like maybe spaghetti strap tank tops or halters, or tube tops might be preferred by some folks, but probably not necessarily something that our Afghan friends would find comfortable. So we made sure that those went to Goodwill or to other clothing donation sites so that someone could have access to them, even if it wasn't being used by our community. We also had some elected leaders like State Representative Mickey Dollins come and visit the Refugee Resource Center to see the work that we were doing and also to get a sense of what are the needs of this new community so that we can help from the leadership side of things. He was just one of several elected leaders who came to visit with us, and see what was going on in this really amazing project that was the Resource Center. We also used it as a site for some major one-time distributions, like our winter coat drive, where we were able to provide every individual in the community with brand new coats and winter accessories. Not kind of the mix of things that you get in a donation drive, but brand new to them, that were delivered to people at their apartment complexes where they lived. We did backpack drives so that every Afghan student starting a new school year would have all the supplies they needed to make their school year a success. We partnered with a local church to do a diaper drive, getting a month of free baby supplies to every infant and expectant mom over kind of a period of time. And we would have loved to do more, but unfortunately, the cost of things like diapers and formula and wipes really had skyrocketed at that point. And so we figured even a month of supplies was better than nothing, but we would really have loved to do more. And then some really unique thing we were able to do from the Resource Center was our Eid clothing bazaars. Eid ul-Fitr is one of the two major holidays in the Islamic religious calendar. And so we wanted folks to be able to celebrate their Eid holidays in clothing that was like beautiful and comfortable and reminded them kind of being at home. If you can kind of imagine, wanting to celebrate like Easter or Thanksgiving or Christmas, in nice clothing that makes you feel good and makes you feel the specialness of that holiday. We wanted to provide that for our Afghan families. And so we had the Muslim community come together and donate some really beautiful Desi clothing outfits with embroidery and the glitter and the sequins so that people could choose from that and they could celebrate the holidays in style. And that was a really special experience to see people accessing that clothing and feeling so comfortable and so happy when they were celebrating their Eid holidays. I'm particularly proud of the new partnerships that we formed during phase 2. The first Eid holiday that was celebrated here in Oklahoma we were able to block off the parking lot of the hotels where many of the families were staying and just do a lot of celebrating outside and kind of in the lobbies. So we brought in food from a local Muslim-owned business. A car dealership actually partnered with us to do a massive toy drive, and we distributed toys to every child. Eid al-Fitr is kind of like Christmas for Christian kids, where it's expected that you would get presents. And so for some of the families that weren't able to do that for themselves, it was really, really wonderful to see these kids getting presents and unwrapping them and feeling so happy and excited about celebrating this holiday. Our second Eid holiday that was actually this year in 2023 was even bigger, and it was so, so exciting. The local YMCA actually reached out to us and said, we would really like to help you celebrate Eid in a really special way. And so they actually opened an entire facility for us on a Saturday afternoon to help to staff with over 50 of their own volunteers. And they set up rooms for the women and kids to eat and to be able to listen to music and dance, and separate rooms for the men to be able to eat and listen to music and dance. Because in Afghanistan, it's very common for people of different genders to socialize separately. And so when the women were able to kind of get off into their own space, many of them felt comfortable taking their face coverings off or taking their scarves off, dancing and celebrating together. And that was a really incredible experience, because during the first Eid festival, we got a speaker out and people were plugging in phones and listening to music from Afghanistan. And the men circled up and started to dance. And the women, from where they were standing and watching, one of them approached and said, my son and my husband are dancing, and this is the happiest I've seen them since we had to leave home. And so giving them that comfort and that level of connection and celebration in a new place was so rewarding to see. We had hundreds of kiddos running around doing the games and the activities, enjoying the food, making gigantic messes everywhere, as kids are going to do. We had people coming in their best outfits. The girls would get together in the gym where all the mirrors, and they would take selfies and they would take photos of each other. It was such a relatable experience that, oh, we're celebrating this very special time together as a community. And we were so, so pleased to have this partnership. And we're really looking forward to Eid in 2024, because the YMCA has promised that it's going to be even bigger and even better. We were very, very concerned about the immigration needs of this new population. Catholic Charities had a very limited legal staff at that time, and they were pretty clear that their capacity was not going to allow them to do the immigration paperwork and filings and representation for the entire new population of Afghan Oklahomans. And so the Oklahoma City Afghan Legal Network was born. It was basically a group of 3 attorneys that got together and said, oh my gosh, who is going to do this? Who's going to meet this need? I guess it's us. And so they formed this group where they recruited volunteer attorneys, volunteer legal staff, and began filing the initial asylum applications for over 400 clients. And that's 400 clients in that over 400 groups of people. It could be individuals, it could be entire families. And they shared with us just a couple of weeks ago that they had asylum applications filed for every single person who came through their door looking for their pro bono services. And they were also working on permanent residency applications for every person who had sought out their services. They did not have to turn any individual or any family away. And so while some families opted to work through other legal service providers, sometimes they hired private attorneys, or they were pursuing immigration status through other means that other pro bono networks were able to meet. The fact that this network arose and was able to respond to the need in such a comprehensive and thorough way was an incredible triumph for the Oklahoma City community. Tulsa did a really special thing where they partnered up with the Immigration Center at the local YWCA, as well as the University of Tulsa's law school, and set up an immigration clinic where they were able to address needs in that manner. And so 2 different places, an hour and a half away from each other, who addressed the need in different ways, but everybody who needed these crucial legal services was able to get them in a way that was affordable and made sense for them and their family. So we were really pleased to see that progress. Ongoing advocacy around the Afghan Adjustment Act has been a huge rallying cry for our friends as well as their allies. The Afghan Adjustment Act is a bicameral, bipartisan piece of legislation that would give our Afghan friends a pathway to permanent residency without the need for them to have to either continue filing for asylum or for humanitarian re-parole in the event their asylum applications are not processed in time. So this would also provide safe evacuation for the family members that have been left behind in Afghanistan who weren't able to be airlifted out of Kabul in August of 2021. So we've had phone and text banks where people called and contacted their elected delegates to try and get them to vote for this Afghan Adjustment Act. I hosted a couple of letter writing parties at local churches where people wrote letters to our senators to encourage them to vote for the Afghan Adjustment Act. And we still have those advocacy materials like call scripts, phone numbers, and email addresses, as well as guidance on how to meet with elected leaders. That's all available on our website, careoklahoma.com/Afghan advocacy, that we have lots of people accessing these materials, hoping that they can do some advocacy teams of their own. We were very gratified in August of 2022 to receive a sizable grant from the Oklahoma State Department of Health in order to address the health inequities that were really arising amongst our Afghan population. So our teammate Ruslan Hassan has been here since September of 2022, and I'm not going to read to you everything that Ruslan has accomplished because we would be here all day if I was telling you everything that he had done. But some major highlights are that he has connected the families with the vaccinations that their kiddos needed to get in school and stay in school. He distributed thousands of kits of free COVID-19 PPE gear and also information on COVID vaccines and on testing. And then he revamped and re-released our Healthcare Provider's Guide to Islamic Religious Practices, which is also available on our website, and added a ton more detailed information about how to effectively serve the Muslim patients and clients that were coming in the doors of these healthcare facilities. So we're very proud of Ruslan's work, and he's got even more planned for 2024. So where we are now is phase 3, which is really creating a sense of belonging for our new Afghan Oklahoma family members. Our goal is to advance the social emotional wellness of this community so that they are able to accomplish their own goals and develop a sense of identity and pride in who they are and even in how they came to be our newest neighbors and our newest family members. We're hoping that we can manage conflict, that we can create that resilience because we have seen what these families and these people are capable of. And we're so pleased to be approaching this future that I think is bright, not only for our Afghan neighbors, but for all of us who have been part of their journey. We've been hosting Women's Day Out and also Boys' Days Out at local parks. Many of the folks who have presented to mental health professionals have told us that my doctor says I need to be walking, I need to be getting exercise. And that serves both the physical health aspect, but also the mental health aspect of getting out in a safe place and being able to just walk around and enjoy and appreciate nature. And living in Oklahoma, that can sometimes be difficult because there's only like 6 days a year that it's nice to be outside here. The rest of the time, it's either miserably hot or miserably cold. But we have found that this community is incredibly resilient in that none of our weather seems to really bother them. And so we're able to set up these days out at local parks. We almost always will have a craft activity. The last one we had, you can see here the little painted pumpkins that everybody made. And then we'll usually take a walk on some nice little guided trail, just so that everybody gets a chance to do things like practice English, meet up with old friends, play games together for the young people, talk about raising their kids, and kind of figure out what's going on and what's next for everyone. Our Boys' Day Out was a little bit more active, but they organized a cricket match at a local park where they had been regularly meeting already and set up sort of a makeshift cricket pitch. And this was the day after the India-Pakistan cricket match at the World Cup. And so everybody's, feelings were everybody was having a lot of feelings about cricket that day. Don't ask me how cricket works. I would not be able to tell you if my life depended on it, but they were really engaged and excited in it. So we brought in packs of Gatorade and snacks and food and just gave everybody the opportunity to be together doing something fun. You're not asked to learn anything. You're not talking about your struggles unless you want to do that, but you're just spending time together doing something that everyone enjoys. These have been very, very popular, both with Afghan community members and with the volunteers who come to share these moments. And so we can't wait to start replicating these again in 2024. our refugee services coordinator set up these computer classes where in our office building, we realized that there was a place down the hall that said Computer Club of Oklahoma. And we approached them saying, kind of, what's your deal? I've never heard of you. And their whole deal is they teach people how to use computers. They said our typical demographic is seniors who didn't grow up as digital natives and who need to learn how to do things like set up online accounts and check their own emails. And so they said, we would love to make computers more accessible to the Afghan community. So we worked with them and the resettlement agency and a group of 4 women to do computer classes and help teach them how to do very basic things like turn a computer on and navigate a mouse and a file explorer, and even do things like type their own name and set up an email account for themselves. And it was very basic, but the amount of empowerment that these women got from being able to use and operate their own computer was so rewarding. And it was so successful that we're looking at ways to replicate it with even more women, at least 2 more times, to be able to do these very intensive one-on-one instruction classes where people are getting a lot of individualized attention and they're able to really spend the time asking the questions about how things work, and they don't feel rushed. There's no kind of pushing you through the program. It all advances at the speed of the participants. So that was really rewarding, and we're really excited to see the results of this. Just this past week, a local church that's been very involved with Afghan resettlement had actually sponsored several families, had a potluck luncheon where they encouraged Afghan women as well as kind of local community members to bring in foods from their own culture and share them together and talk about how they cooked the meals themselves. And so this was such a fun event. I unfortunately wasn't able to go that day, but all of my team members came back just glowing and also stuffed full of food. And I was really glad that they brought me a little plate too, because I got to enjoy the food that the Afghan women had brought and prepared for us. You know, Afghan culture, like many cultures all over the world, love and care are communicated through food. And so being able to share experiences over breaking bread to get literally sitting and breaking bread together and talking about the importance of food in our culture, that is such a joining activity. That's such a great community builder. And so we've seen this model be very, very successful. And we're really excited for other groups to replicate this same kind of project. As we closed down the Refugee Resource Center, we knew that there was still going to be a need for the culturally relevant Desi clothing. And so we made a partnership with a local Goodwill affiliate. And they are now accepting and stocking donations of Desi clothing. There's an entire section, as you can see, kind of in this photo here. It says women's Desi clothes, and so now people can go to the local Goodwill and they can buy their own Desi clothing at prices that are very accessible to them. Nothing will be priced over $10, which places these sets of clothing well within the reach of most of the families. And this has become a very, very popular offering at this location. We're actually hoping that this can be a model for other donations of cultural clothing, things like kimonos or hanbok for East Asians, or for the African clothing that many of our Sudanese refugees are looking for. So we're hoping that this model could be something not only for other Muslim refugees, but for other refugees who would like to access their cultural clothing, but find it often priced out of their reach. So our refugee services coordinator, Jen, continues to make visits to individuals and families in their homes so that she's able to sit and share with them kind of what's going on in their lives. Through these home visits, we get to know the families and what they're really going through. And we've been alerted to things like bullying or harassment, struggles with law enforcement, and substandard housing conditions. But we're also able to share in all of the joys that these families are experiencing. New members of the family, people graduating from school and making plans for their future, many of them for the first time in decades, able to really think through, what do I want to do with my life? And so these family visits are a great way for us to connect with the community in a very low stakes way, because we're not asking them to do anything. We're just asking them to sit and share with us. I am very proud of the work we've done connecting with our elected leaders around the resettlement project. So we were really gratified that State Senator Carrie Hicks saw all of the work that we were doing and also all of the struggles that our community was facing and wanted to bring this up to our state capitol. The whole refugee resettlement process, so many folks in such a short amount of time, really revealed to us and to the service community, there are some significant gaps in Oklahoma's social services programming. And so we wanted our state elected leaders to become familiar with how policy was shaping the lives of our Afghan friends for better and for worse. So we joined with Senator Hicks to do an interim study up at the state capitol, where we and our partners presented to the Senate Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, actually. And we shared our experiences, and then we're able to make some policy recommendations that we had found would really have benefited both this community and any other community of newcomers. And you can kind of see from this room here, this was us kind of getting started, but there's a variety of people around this table. And then there were actually people that filled up this extra room. They opened up an additional room for our audience members because there were so many people that came up to support this interim study. This is another photo. You can see how full the room became. But we made these suggestions to our elected leaders that they create a statewide portal for this kind of response to newcomers so that we would have coordinated responses to crisis situations, which is really what we were facing with this massive resettlement project. We were really concerned by some of the housing issues that we saw, the lack of affordable housing stock, the lack of protections for tenants whose landlords were refusing to make necessary repairs, or tenants who were stuck in uninhabitable living conditions. We actually had families that were having so many problems with their apartments that they said, I had better housing in Afghanistan. There are holes in my walls. There are pests coming in. There are cockroaches crawling on my children while they sleep. Our plumbing doesn't work. Our air conditioning doesn't work. My home in Afghanistan was better than this. And so we really wanted our elected leaders to understand that some really common sense protections for renters in our state could make not only these folks' life better, but for all other vulnerable and low income Oklahomans who are placed in these positions. And then we also talked about the challenge of state issued documents like IDs, birth certificates, marriage licenses, often being inaccessible to people with limited English proficiency. And bringing these concerns to our elected leaders was so rewarding because we got to have a cross section of all of the different communities that had been involved in this project: interfaith organizations, experienced resettlement professionals, volunteers who had never really talked to a refugee until they got involved in this work. And it was this very strong coalition of people that said, hey, you leaders, you really need to be aware of what's going on the ground. I have done more cultural and religious sensitivity trainings in the past 2 years than I had done in all of the years prior. There was a month or two period of time in kind of September, October of 2021 where I was almost every day, I was being called upon to educate people on the realities of serving Muslim patients and clients and students and families and employees. And I think that speaks really highly of the Oklahoma community, that people said, I really want to be of service, but I'm not sure that I understand. What can you teach me? What resources are out there for me? And so everywhere I've gone to do these trainings, I have been met with the most wonderful reception. Teachers and librarians in particular have been really, really incredible partners in this work. I've never met a librarian that was not absolutely willing to go to bat for every single member of the community, but also doctors, HR professionals, school administrators who are not necessarily the ones in the classroom, but who are still hearing kind of what's going on with Afghan students. Everybody has been so open and so receptive to this education that I just can't wait to keep doing these trainings because I'm getting just such incredible feedback and incredible resources out of it. So I'm going to kind of wrap up with what's next. What we have learned, all of these lessons throughout the past 2 years, are things that we know we already held, but we have been called upon to use these tools in our toolbox. I think more than anyone could have ever anticipated. We've had to be creative with our solutions. We've had to be patient, both with other people and with ourselves, because not every problem is something that we could immediately address in the moment, despite how much we might have I've wanted to. We had to be very resilient and be able to pivot when things didn't go our way. All of these lessons, again, are things that we already held, but things that we were called upon to use more and more often as we got deeper involved in refugee resettlement work. We learned about setting boundaries, about being able to say no when it made the most sense and when we had to say no that we couldn't do things. We had to work with partners that we sometimes were frustrated with, sometimes that we didn't understand why they made certain decisions, but we had to work with them anyway because it was for the good of the greater community. We also had to remember that we were meeting everyone where they were, whether it's an Afghan family who has just arrived in Oklahoma or someone who's been in Oklahoma for a long time and means really well, but just doesn't know how to do their best. We always had to keep in mind to treat other people not just as we ourselves want to be treated, but using the platinum rule. Treat other people how they want to be treated. Meet people where they are, and you will find that they will be more responsive, and be able to be better friends to you as you are able to be a better friend to them. And we learned how to pivot from a disaster response model to a community building model. The first arrival of families, I remember I was on a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon and they said, "Oh, your first family will probably be coming in a couple of weeks. So you've got plenty of time to plan and prepare." Wednesday morning, they said, "Oh, your first family is coming tonight. They land at 4:30. Are you ready?" And we were not ready. We were super not ready, but we made it work. We went from this disaster response where we've had to move very, very quickly, triaging needs, communicating as little as possible because there was just so much going on, with a focus on speed. And the 20% versus 100% rule was, we decided very early on that rather than meeting 100% of needs for 20% of the population, we were going to try to meet 20% of needs for 100% of the population. And that was kind of our framework for every decision that we made in our refugee services work. Now that we're in phase 3, we're in a community building model. We are more focused on listening than doing. We are thinking about pivoting where things aren't working out because we have to be flexible with what this community wants and needs. And we're looking at empowering the community themselves to take ownership and leadership over their own growth. So I like, this is the Avengers in the background because I think of the way of our team worked was we were like the Avengers. We each partner in resettlement had their own superpower, their own kind of special ability that only they could do. And so rather than duplicating efforts, we thought about, okay, what is it that the community needs and who is the best equipped to meet that need? I think of it, and I still think of it as like building a house. The primary resettlement organization, Catholic Charities, was absolutely the foundation. They had the greater experience, they had been doing this work already. And so when it came to the mechanics of arrival and the first healthcare screenings and getting people into their first jobs, it made sense for them to take the lead there. They were the foundation without which none of this work would have been possible. The existing support organizations, like the Spiro Project, were responsible for sort of the ongoing needs past that sort of 90-day period of refugee placement. They continue to navigate transportation for those families who don't have cars yet. They are helping people navigate their ongoing healthcare needs. They're making sure that people are succeeding in the places that they are placed, whether that's their employment or their enrollment in school. They are sort of the walls and the framework for building a house. Where we really saw ourselves at Care Oklahoma was the furnishings that make a home really a home. Things like culturally relevant clothing, things like the supplemental food that was fit their religious dietary restrictions and was familiar to them, right? Things like, how do we build community in this new and different and strange place? And we were also able to meet a lot of the religious needs, educating providers on what Muslim clients would need, and also educating the Muslim community on what it means to be newcomers in a new place, and how does your religion give you the tools to become resilient as you are going through this journey. We also realized that it was so important to celebrate all of our successes. So in the past year, we have honored and thanked volunteers. We joined in a celebration for the team at the Afghan Legal Network just a couple of weeks ago to honor and celebrate their progress. We always kind of joke, like, we always have a reason to throw a party. And so anytime, someone succeeds or does something great, we want to celebrate those wins because this work is very long. And sometimes things don't go the way that you want it to. So you have to celebrate the wins where they come so that you can keep everybody on your team and all of your partners deeply engaged in the work and make everybody want to keep coming back. One of the things that I'm the most proud of, that I consider one of the greatest successes, is that we see the Afghan students wearing their cultural clothing to school. on a regular basis. And this is not something that I've actually seen with other immigrant communities as widely. There's a family in my neighborhood, and they will go for walks around the neighborhood, and they're all wearing their traditional clothing. And that to me says, we are building a community where you are safe. You feel comfortable and proud of your heritage enough to wear it in a public location. Whereas a lot of recent immigrants, the first thing that they want to do is hide those things away. They don't feel comfortable doing that outwardly to the rest of the world. And so that blend between honoring where you came from and acclimating to a new place, we're seeing that play out with our Afghan community in a really special and unique way. And I consider that to be one of the sort of intangible successes of Oklahoma's refugee resettlement process. I know we haven't done things the way that other states or other communities have done. Oklahoma is a really strange and unique place in a lot of ways, but we have really built something special with our new Afghan friends that I hope can be replicated with other Oklahoma newcomers in many years to come. Religious traditions across the world share with us lessons for how to welcome strangers amongst our community. It can be really easy to focus in on the things that make us different, the things that make a new community separate from us, that make them the other, that we are the norm and they are something different and unique and weird. And I think that it's really good for us to be able to go back to religious traditions and whatever faith tradition that motivates a person to do this work, to be reminded that the stranger among you is still one of you. And it is important to treat them the way that they are deserving of human care and consideration. And it's also important to know that this is something shared across faith traditions. It's not unique to only one type of practice. It is something that people all around the world for the entirety of human history have seen the value in welcoming the other, welcoming the stranger when they are in need. And I don't think I have to tell this particular group that that our religious traditions that we hold so dear are the steering. They are kind of the guidance in how to do this effectively and why to do it because of the reward that it brings to us in our hearts to have been part of this incredible journey and this incredible project. So thank you so much for joining me today and letting me share with you our experiences here in the Oklahoma family. My contact information is here on the screen. I can also put it in the chat for you later. The best way to stay up to date on what's going on with us is to check out our website, careoklahoma.com, or follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I put kind of our handles here that I would love to see you follow us and connect with us. And there's also an info box on our website. If you have questions, that you're more than welcome to direct it. I'll be honest that I get all of those. All of the info emails come to me. Everything that happens on social media comes to my inbox. So it's all going through me. I am really easy to get a hold of in this project. So I would love to hear from you if you've got questions, whether or not you want to talk them through today or you want to talk about them at a later time. I would really welcome having you friends join me in sharing what's going on here in Oklahoma.
Well,
And I can also share with you some of the resources that I use to create this, as well as the websites for our partners that have been just so incredible to work with over the past couple of years. And again, I can make sure that this all gets distributed as a PDF, so it'll be all accessible to every attendee as much as you want. So that is the conclusion of my slides. I will stop sharing my screen so I can come back and see your faces. And I'm happy to chat through anything that you would find helpful.
well, Veronica, I just appreciate so much not only your innovation and your inspiration that you provide to us, but I know that you are doing day-to-day work, and to take time out of that work, this amazing work that you're doing, and talk with us. We just really appreciate you for being here. I see a couple of questions and comments in the chat box. We might have a couple of minutes to look at that. We'll close the webinar at the top of the hour again, and I think Veronica's going to stay just a few minutes afterwards if you have other questions. Can
Yes,
you see the chat?
I can. And the first question I see here is, how did they decide where they were sent to live? The answer is that they did not. They did not choose their relocation sites unless they already had family living in a particular area where they could ask that they would be resettled there. But actually, what we've heard is that families from other parts of the country have heard about Oklahoma and are now coming into Oklahoma, choosing to live here because they've heard about the great experiences that our Oklahoma Afghan families have had. And so they did not choose to be settled here initially, but we now have people migrating here to be part of the Oklahoma community. What happens to a refugee who shows up and is not Afghan? So this presentation was specifically focused on the Afghan resettlement project because that's where we were called in to help. There is an entire other, what I consider the traditional refugee resettlement process called resettlement and placement. It looks a little bit different, right? What happens when refugees come through this traditional placement is they have to flee their home country due to fear of persecution, murder, torture, kidnapping, death. They leave their home country. They reside in typically a refugee camp for an average of 17 years, but it could be anywhere from 2 to 20. And then they apply for refugee status while they're outside of the country. Once they achieve refugee status, then they are put on a plane and brought here. And a resettlement agency that has a contract with the federal government knows that they are coming and meets them here to get them set up with their new life. So very, very rarely are you going to have someone who just shows up as a refugee that nobody knew they were coming. Somebody somewhere has been part of coordinating how they got here as a refugee. So refugee legal status is applied for and granted while someone is outside of the country. Asylum is a different status that happens when someone has made it to the country and are asking not to be sent back to their home country because of a fear of persecution. And that is a legal process where people can show up at ports of entry and say, I cannot go back home because I will be killed or tortured, or my family will be kidnapped. I must stay here. And then they start asylum proceedings from there. I hope that kind of answers the question. That was like a 30-second answer to something that attorneys spend decades of their life working on. So
we really appreciate the fact that that there are attorneys that do immigration work with us in Oklahoma. We might add, Veronica, and you could add to this as well. I do know that there are really just a handful of agencies in the United States that work with the U.S. State Department to receive those Afghan refugees. And there are a couple of that are working here in Oklahoma directly with the State Department. One is Catholic Charities, and I believe Sparrow is starting to take some refugees as well.
that is correct.
So we have amazing partners with wonderful resources. And I loved the examples that you gave of the different parts that different parties play in the midst of that collaboration. So we're going to stay just a little bit later, but we are at the top of the hour, so we will formally close the webinar. Before we close, I know that you all want to say thank you, and many of you do that in the chat box, and many of you are waving as well. To those of you who have your cameras on, thank you so much, Veronica. Stay late if you can. I do want to formally close, but remind you that next week is the final webinar in this semester. And in that final session, we're welcoming Adam Shahan. Now, I will tell you, he's going to be talking about polarization and conflict in a culture longing for healing right before you gather with your family for Thanksgiving. So I know that will be a wonderful presentation. I'll tell you, I heard Adam preach a powerful sermon series this summer about polarization. And after one of those sermons, someone who was a guest turned around and said, that's the best sermon I've ever heard in my life. So he is a powerful speaker, one of the rising stars within Christianity and United Methodism in Oklahoma. And I know you won't want to miss that as well. So thank you again for being here. Veronica, thank you so much for your presentation. It is such a joy to know you. And I'm so glad to introduce you to these amazing people here as well. Thank you all for being here. Be safe.